Hey everybody. In this episode, I kind of want to talk about the thing that most frustrates me as a software developer, in particular a web application developer. See, I really like getting things done and building interesting products and making progress and adding features to these products and seeing the end solutions being used by the end users. But I feel like nowadays there are a lot of things about the technology itself that kind of gets in the way of you writing code and making progress on those features and just getting in the way of making it to the end product that you're trying to build. So I've been doing this for a fairly long time. I remember like 10, 15 years ago, I felt like things were a bit simpler and the expectations were lower. There were systems like PHP or ASP, which was very similar to PHP, where you had like your HTML web page with some kind of like scripting code that were sprinkled in there. And then there was like the Apache web server. It had certain functionality that you could do with it. You could configure to do all these interesting things. A lot of my early programs in web applications were Perl scripts run out of the CGI bin directory or little PHP programs. And then application frameworks, they started to evolve to be more complex than that and adding more features. Rails became a thing. ASP.NET became a thing where you have the MVC model. And there were these more structured ways of writing the programs, which came with a lot of benefits. And I think nowadays you have a blend of technologies coming together into what makes a web application. So not only is the backend on what's running on the web server more sophisticated and structured, but on the front end client side, there's a lot of development too in the world of JavaScript, and you have ES6 and TypeScript, and as a result, you could build much fancier capabilities that run within the web browser on the client side. And then on top of that, there's also a lot of new technologies going on in the back end, not so much in the application code itself, but in how the code is run. So we have technologies like Docker and all of the things, the APIs that your application connects to on the web server are a lot more rich with capabilities. They're designed so that you could deploy at a larger scale and with a lot more consistency. But all these new technologies that add all these great benefits to making your capabilities much greater, I think also come with some trade-offs in that it's a lot harder to get all of these systems to talk to each other, and there's a lot more operational complexity going on in any sort of web program that you write. As a Ruby on Rails developer, I see the platform and framework kind of evolving to try to accommodate some of these technologies and fit in with it, but it's got some issues, I think, with the Rails way of doing things, and it's kind of clashing up against some of these new technologies, in particular things like Docker. It's difficult to deploy a Rails app, in my opinion, on a Dockerized server. And then on top of that, you have the evolution of the front end where there's all this new stuff going on with JavaScript. You've got a lot of things you could do with JavaScript using Node on the back end part of your server, and also compiling JavaScript to run a very rich interface on the front end of your application. And Rails is trying to accommodate those as well. So that's why you've got things like ESBuild. So in this video, I'm just going to show you a couple of examples of things I was trying to do on this e-voting application that kind of got in my way, and just to give you a little sense of the types of operational problems that really get in the way of me doing the coding aspects and building functionality into my system, and then I end up debugging these weird glitches in the frameworks themselves and how they fundamentally work. Okay, so here's the first issue that I ran into. Here's what the landing page for this website is supposed to look like. I have just a little description of what the app is, and on this side I have an image file. just a stock photo, free stock photo that I found. And the way that this stock photo is filled in is I have a background image with background size specified as cover here in the style sheet. Now, this looked good in local development because it was able to find this image file on the local server, but there was a problem when I tried to upload this to my production setting. So here's what the landing page looked like in production. And the image wasn't displaying properly. And the reason for this was that the request to find that file was failing. And here's exactly why that was happening. So here's where our JavaScript directory is located in our Rails application. And this is where we're building both the JavaScript and the style sheets that go into our front end side of our application. As you recall in the previous episode, I told you about the path about how this follows. ESBuild will compile this application.js file, put it here in assets builds, and then the Rails asset pipeline, which is also known as sprockets, will make that available for requests. So in production, what it will do is it will take this application.js file and put it down here into the public folder, which is statically served by Rails. Now, if you're in development mode, if you just try to reference this application.js file, it could still find it. It will compile that on the fly, and the sprockets will serve it up. But what happens is when you're in the production setting, it's trying to save you the CPU power. So what it does is it compiles application.js into a static file so that it doesn't have to recompile it every time. Now, if you notice that particular image, which is referenced in application.scss, so I'm referencing it by the URL assets and then the file name. And Rails should be able to find whatever is in your assets folder because it serves whatever is in public and in this assets directory. So in development, this link here will work. And as you can see here, I have it in the sprockets asset pipeline assets folder in your Rails app assets folder under images. And the way sprockets work is it will be able to look it up and find it there, just like it would be able to find builds application.js. And remember, this is development. What happens in production is it puts it into this public folder, but there's a little bit of a catch here. It doesn't just drop the file into assets. It puts this SHA-1 hash, I believe, on the file name as a cache busting tool so that web browsers don't pull up like an old version of the file, or they don't retain like a cached version of the file and try to use that. So it puts this unique identifier on each file and then it updates the links inside of your templates to make sure that the web browser of your end users is referencing the latest version of this file and the correct version. So if you try to go into production and use that URL for just plain application.js without this this hash at the end of it, or if you try to reference an image without this hash at the end of it, what's going to happen is it won't be able to find it because you won't have the plain image or the plain application.js file in your assets directory. You need this hash figure on it. And the problem why that link was failing in production is because this here is a hard reference to that file without the hash. And I don't know how to update this because I'm not really 100% certain what the hash would be. And even if I was able to calculate that that hash and add on file name, I feel like that would be a bad practice because it could change and then it would be working in production one day and then suddenly not working. So I didn't want to do that. So how do we fix this particular problem? Well, you would have to somehow get the computed version of the file name and insert that here as a variable. But how exactly do you do that? And here's the problem that I ran into. The asset pipeline is a Rails feature, but this whole folder of JavaScript is compiled before Rails touches it. So it's compiled by ESBuild. And what happens is there isn't an easy way for me to insert this as a variable. And another option that I've thought about is using the image loader from ESBuild and loading the image here and having it referenced that way. But the thing is, I would have to somehow patch up what's inside of the style sheet and run that operation on a style sheet, which I felt would be a really messy solution. So you've got multiple modules or application frameworks at play here that get really annoying. You have this mix of technologies. You've got the style sheets, for which there's no easy way of injecting a variable into here. You've got ESBuild, which gives you certain options for pulling this stuff in, but modifying this would be a messy solution. And then on top of that, the ESBuild goes through an intermediary thing where it's getting compiled by the Rails asset pipeline and then dropped into the public folder. So there's several layers of processing going on here, which kind of gets in the way and could give you unexpected results. I think the most concerning types of bugs to me are the ones caused by your development environment being different from your production environment. And I haven't played around enough with other frameworks like Rails to know how severe the problem is in other environments. But I would imagine that a lot of them have the same thing, where certain things are optimized so that you have a better development experience. But once you get out there in that production environment, there's just a few little variables that have changed or are different, and those could kind of throw you off and hit you in unexpected ways. The solution that I came up with was to bypass the asset pipeline altogether for this. So what I did was I just have it reference this image file. I'm not going to change like the image. The hash is probably not going to change. I don't care if it gets cached. So what I did was I just dropped it into the Rails public folder and just have the static image being served up. And it's kind of funny. I wasted like 2 hours trying to figure out what was going on and why that image wasn't working, if there's a proper way that I could get it in the asset pipeline. But in the end, just doing the really simple thing sometimes is the best, most efficient option. Yeah, I think the difference between development environments and production are probably one of the most annoying kind of bugs that I have to work in, because they're really hard to see coming. And I don't think it's just a Ruby on Rails problem. You could have this problem with other frameworks too. A while back, I was working on a Java application, and the team that I was working on was trying to add a printer to the print server, and the Java web application that we had it didn't have the tooling necessary to really give us a good view of what was going on that server. We had to do a lot of guesswork because Java is a compiled language, and unlike Rails and Java, you don't have a console in there. I think one of the things that makes Rails really easy to work with in production is that you've got a Rails console, so you could go into your production server, start running commands. It's really dangerous to do that, by the way, so you have to have somebody on the team who knows what they're doing. And when I've worked on some really big Rails projects for big companies, sometimes we had to do that to diagnose problems. But I mean, imagine if we didn't have that access, how difficult it would be to debug a problem that is caused by a difference in your development environment versus your production environment. So anyway, I hope you found that video to be kind of interesting, just giving you an overview of some of the operational aspects of writing web applications. I mean, you've got the coding problem, the coding challenge, which is one dimension of writing an application. But nowadays, you've got a lot more technologies that you're trying to weld together and make all work properly, and that can be really difficult too. And I kind of wanted to highlight that in this video, especially for people who are kind of new to the industry or want to get into software coding, and show just kind of what the realism of it is. So if you like this, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and give this video a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next video.